The History of Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue by Pablo Picasso, plundered by the Nazis, miraculously intercepted by the Free French forces, and sold in 2017 for a large sum, is arguably one of the most richly compelling examples of the art world's triumph over the Nazi regime's great thefts in World War II.
Pablo Picasso's Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue was inspired by a woman named Dora Maar. For many of Picasso's enthusiasts, Dora Maar represents one of the most creative times in his life. Gillot, one of Picasso's closest friends, recalls, "Picasso told me that one of the first times he saw Dora, she was sitting at the Dumago. She was wearing black gloves with little pink flowers on them. She took off the gloves and picked up a long, pointed knife, which she began to drive into the table between her outstretched fingers to see how close she could come to each finger without actually cutting herself. From time to time, she missed by a tiny fraction of an inch, and before she stopped playing with her knife, her hand was covered with blood. Pablo told me that was what made his mind to interest himself in her. He was fascinated." Dora Maar was a photographer and also closely connected with the Surrealist movement, an art movement focusing on capturing the surreal and imagination. She was very intelligent, intense, and almost haunting, which interested Picasso. Dora became an outlet for Picasso during wartime. He was frustrated by the war and enjoyed defying the Nazi aesthetic of bland classic works that further emphasized their ideology of racial purity. He created a sort of tragic beauty through his distorted portraits to contradict Nazi ideals. Pablo Picasso painted Dora Maar on numerous occasions. She acted as his muse for an entire series entitled The Weeping Woman. This collection is one of Picasso's most famous and renowned, but these works paint Dora in a tragic, twisted manner, utilizing garish lines and abstracted proportions to illustrate horror and a deep sadness. In Picasso's words to Gillot, he says, "For years I have painted her in tortured forms, not through sadism and not with pleasure either, just obeying a vision that forced itself on me. It was deep reality, not a superficial one." However, with Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue, Picasso sheds a different light on his muse. She is painted in a whimsical, light-hearted manner. Picasso even allowed her to hold a quirky crescent moon smile, her teeth becoming one of the centerpieces of the work. Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue is painted in bold, contrasting colors. The strokes are heavy and layered in an impasse fashion. Each line is thick and filled with emotion. Dora Maar is painted wearing a characteristic purple hat and a bright blue dress, which further adds a sense of joy to his work.
Paul Rosenberg, the original owner of the piece and a close friend and colleague of Pablo Picasso, was a successful art dealer in France. Coming from a well-known Jewish family, Rosenberg was aware of Nazi ideology and the dangers that his family could face. He took precautions by storing his collection in 2 different places near Bordeaux. The Rosenberg family then left for New York in 1940, except Paul's son, Alexander, who fled to Britain and joined the Free French forces who fought the Axis forces during and after the Nazi occupation of France. One of their biggest roles in World War II was the recovery of looted art by the Nazis. Nazis, led by Alfred Rosenberg, no relationship to Paul Rosenberg, located and looted most of the dealer's collection, including Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue. The collection was stored in the empty Jeu de Paume in Paris for eventual shipment to a Nazi depot in Germany. Rose Valland was a museum employee at the Jeu de Paume who continued to work during the Nazi occupation of France. She supplied information to the Free French forces. Soon before the liberation of France in 1944, Valland informed the resistance of a train meant to leave Paris that was carrying 148 crates of French-owned Impressionist paintings, all deemed degenerate by Adolf Hitler. One of these was Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue. The train was successfully delayed until the French resistance could make it to the scene. Lieutenant Alexander Rosenberg, Paul Rosenberg's son, led the forces and overpowered the guards to access the train. After examining the contents of the train, Alexander Rosenberg recognized many of the paintings from his childhood and realized that most of the pieces had belonged to his father. 64 Picassos were recovered from the train, one being Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue. The French Commission eventually returned this portion of the collection to the Rosenberg. Until then, in March 1966, G. David Thompson, a modern art collector from Pittsburgh, bought the piece at an estate sale in New York. The piece was later stored in the Galerie Baylor, a museum that displays Hildy and Ernst Baylor's art collection in Basel, Switzerland. It was then acquired by the Rosenberg family in 2011 and put in a private collection in Rome. and then sold to the current owner in a Christie's auction in 2017 for $45 million.
The recovery of Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue was extremely successful. Many works of art were not as lucky to survive Nazi lootings. It's important to stress that while Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue has a celebratory story, numerous other pieces of highly valuable artwork have not had the same fate. Although Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue has ended up in safe hands for now, there will always be anxiety over future acts of war and theft that not only threaten society, but the great cultural works of our world, and the fate of this great work will never be secure. Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue is a story of hope and triumph, yet it is imperative to learn from its success and be aware of the constant possibility of destruction that we must work together to safeguard our cultural artifacts from.
The history of Femme, Assise, Robe, Bleue by Pablo Picasso, plundered by the Nazis, miraculously intercepted by the Free French forces, and sold in 2017 for a large sum, is arguably one of the most richly compelling examples of the art world's triumph over the Nazi regime's great thefts in World War II.